The autumn wind cut through the rows of white marble at the cemetery outside of Virginia, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves, a somber atmosphere that matched the grey, heavy sky looming above. Elias Thorne stood motionless before a modest headstone, his imposing silhouette stark against the fading light of the afternoon, looking more like a statue carved from grief than a living man. He wore a dark civilian jacket that struggled to conceal the width of his shoulders, shoulders that had carried the weight of fallen brothers and secret wars, yet now seemed ready to crumble under an invisible burden far heavier than any rucksack. The cemetery was empty, save for the distant caretaker, allowing the silence to wrap around Elias, suffocating him with the memory of a laughter he hadn't heard in 3 years. He stared at the name etched into the cold stone, Lily Thorne, and the dates that marked a life far too short, a span of time that felt like a jagged scar across his soul. Elias clenched his jaw, the muscles twitching as he fought the rising tide of agony that threatened to breach the walls of his iron discipline, a discipline forged in the brutal training of Coronado and tempered in the fires of foreign deserts. He was a man trained to suppress, to compartmentalize, to lock away trauma in mental boxes so that he could complete the mission. But standing here, the mission was over, and there was nothing left but the void. He dropped to one knee, the damp grass soaking through his denim jeans, ignoring the physical discomfort as he reached out with a trembling hand to trace the letters of her name. His fingers were calloused and rough, stained by a lifetime of violence, and they felt unworthy to touch even the memory of something so innocent. A single breath escaped him, ragged and broken, sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet necropolis. Tears, alien and burning, began to pool in eyes that had witnessed the worst of humanity without blinking, blurring his vision until the gravestone was nothing but a grey smudge. It was the first time since the funeral, a ceremony he had attended in a haze of sedatives and shock, that he allowed the reality to fully penetrate his defenses. The official report stated she had died in a car accident while he was deployed, a catastrophic failure of brakes on a slick road, but the guilt of his absence was a living thing that gnawed at his insides. He believed that if he had been there, if he hadn't chosen the team over his family, he would have checked the car, he would have been driving, he would have saved her. The sob that finally ripped from his throat was guttural, a primal sound of a wounded animal that shattered the stillness of the cemetery. Hidden 50 yards away, concealed behind the thick trunk of an ancient oak tree and the shadows of a mausoleum, a 12-year-old girl watched the scene with wide, terrified eyes. Lily, her hair longer now and dyed a darker shade of brown to mask her identity, pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wore a nondescript oversized hoodie, chosen specifically to make her forgettable, to blend into crowds, a lesson drilled into her by the man standing a few feet behind her. She had been told for 3 years that her father was dangerous, that he had abandoned her, that the enemies he made had forced her into hiding for her own survival. But the man she saw kneeling in the grass didn't look like a monster or a traitor. He looked like a man destroyed by love. The man guarding her, a sharp-eyed operative named Miller who posed as her uncle, shifted his weight uncomfortably, checking his watch and scanning the perimeter with professional paranoia. He placed a firm hand on Lily's shoulder, a silent command to remain still, to not engage, to remember the strict protocols that had governed her life since the accident. Miller knew the risks of bringing her here. It was a breach of protocol, a moment of weakness he had allowed only because she had refused to eat or sleep until she saw him on the anniversary. He had expected Elias to be stoic, perhaps angry, confirming the narrative they had fed the girl to keep her compliant. Instead, seeing the legendary operator, broken and weeping, created a volatile variable in an already fragile equation. Lily watched her father pull a small, tarnished object from his pocket, a silver locket she remembered giving him before his last deployment, and press it against his forehead, his body shaking with silent tremors. The image contradicted everything she'd been taught in the safe houses and transient apartments where she had spent the last 36 months. She had constructed a mental image of a cold, indifferent father who chose war over her, a necessary villain to make her isolation bearable. Seeing him now, vulnerable and utterly defeated by her absence, caused a fissure in the foundation of lies she stood upon. The pain on his face was raw and undeniable, a mirror to the loneliness she felt every night, and it sparked a dangerous ember of doubt in her mind. Elias wiped his face with the back of his hand, angry at his own weakness, yet unable to stop the flow of grief that had been dammed up for too long. He spoke to the stone, his voice low and raspy, whispering apologies that he knew would never be heard, confessing the sins of a father who wasn't there when it mattered most. He confessed that he was thinking of ending it, that the silence in his empty house was louder than any battlefield, and that he didn't know how to keep breathing in a world where she didn't exist. The wind carried fragments of his words toward the tree line, not enough to be distinct sentences, but the tone of despair was a universal language that Lily understood instantly. She took a step forward, instinctively wanting to run to him, to shout that she was there, but Miller's grip on her shoulder tightened like a vice. "We have to go, Lily," Miller whispered harshly, his voice devoid of empathy, focused entirely on the tactical situation and the risk of exposure. He saw the way her body tensed, the way her eyes locked onto Elias, and he knew they had stayed too long. The emotional contamination was already setting in. He began to pull her back, using his body to shield her from view, guiding her toward the black sedan, parked on the service road hidden by the high hedges. Lily resisted for a fraction of a second, her feet dragging in the mulch, her eyes desperate to maintain the connection with the weeping figure in the distance. In that split second of resistance, she made a choice that would alter the trajectory of their lives, realizing that the narrative of her safety might be the very cage keeping her from her father. As Miller forced her to turn away, Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, distinct item, a customized military challenge coin Elias had given her years ago, one she was never supposed to have kept. With a sleight of hand she had practiced out of boredom, she dropped it onto the paved path near the mausoleum, a silent breadcrumb left in the wake of her forced departure. It was a desperate gamble, a metallic scream for help that relied entirely on the hope that Elias, the man trained to notice the slightest disturbance in his environment, would see it. She allowed herself to be led away, tears streaming down her own face now, mirroring the man she was leaving behind in the gloom. Elias remained at the grave for another 10 minutes, the storm inside him slowly receding into a dull, throbbing ache that settled deep in his chest. He stood up slowly, his knees stiff, and wiped the dirt from his pants, composing his face back into the mask of the stoic veteran. He took a deep breath of the cold air, grounding himself, preparing to return to the empty existence that awaited him. He turned to leave, his boots crunching softly on the grass, walking a different path toward the exit to avoid the mud. As he passed the old mausoleum, a glint of metal on the dark asphalt caught his peripheral vision, a flash of gold and blue that didn't belong among the grey stones and dead leaves. Elias stopped mid-stride, his instincts flaring up before his conscious mind could even process what he was seeing, his body shifting into a state of heightened alert. He knelt down on the asphalt path, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the small, round object lying innocently near the edge of the grass. It was a challenge coin, heavy and distinct, bearing the insignia of his old unit, SEAL Team 4. But it wasn't just any coin, it was the one he had specially engraved for Lily's 10th birthday. He picked it up, feeling the cold metal against his skin, and flipped it over to reveal the inscription, "Always watching your six, Dad." The breath left his lungs in a sharp hiss as the world tilted on its axis. This coin was supposed to have been buried with her, placed in the casket by his own hand 3 years ago. His mind raced, cycling through rational explanations, trying to find a logical thread that didn't lead to insanity, but his training screamed that this was an anomaly that couldn't be ignored. Had the grave been disturbed? Had someone stolen it before the burial? But the coin looked worn, touched, kept, not like something that had been underground or sitting in a pawn shop. He looked around the cemetery, his gaze sweeping the area with predatory precision, scanning for movement, for tire tracks, for any sign of recent presence. The solitude of the place now felt menacing, the shadows stretching longer as the sun dipped below the horizon, and he realized with a chilling certainty that he had not been alone. Someone had been here, standing right where he was standing now, and they had dropped this, intentionally or accidentally. Miles away, in the back seat of the moving sedan, Lily sat in sullen silence, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, staring out the window at the passing blur of suburban Virginia. The interior of the car smelled of sterile leather and Miller's stale coffee, a suffocating environment that felt more like a mobile prison cell than a vehicle of safety. Miller drove with calculated efficiency, constantly checking the rearview mirrors, his demeanor shifting from the fake uncle to the cold handler he truly was. "You know the rules, Lily," he said, his voice flat, trying to reassert control over the situation. "Visual confirmation only. No contact. You endangered the entire operation today." "He was crying," Lily said softly, her voice trembling with a mixture of sadness and rising anger. "You told me he moved on. You told me he didn't care." She turned to look at the back of Miller's head, her young face hardening with a skepticism that came from years of being lied to. The image of her father on his knees, broken and weeping, contradicted every briefing Miller had given her to keep her compliant in the witness protection program. They had told her that her father's enemies would kill her to get to him, and that Elias had agreed to the separation to save himself, a lie designed to sever her emotional attachment and make her easier to manage. Miller gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles whitening. He knew the psychological conditioning was fracturing. "He cries because he feels guilty, Lily. Guilt isn't love. He's a soldier. He knows his past put a target on your back. If he knew you were alive, he would lead them right to us." Miller was spinning the web tighter, but he could feel the threads snapping. He was an operative used to dealing with assets, not a grieving preteen girl. The operation, authorized by a shadow faction within the intelligence community, relied on Elias believing his daughter was dead to keep him from digging into a botched extraction in Yemen, a mission where unauthorized funds had disappeared and Lily had become the accidental leverage. Back at the cemetery, Elias was no longer the grieving father, he was the hunter. He moved to the spot where the coin had been found and began to analyze the ground with forensic intensity. The heavy rain from the previous night had left the ground soft, and near the large oak tree he found what he was looking for: footprints. They were small, too small for a maintenance worker, the size of a child's sneaker, accompanied by larger, heavier prints of a man wearing tactical boots, the tread pattern familiar, expensive, government issue. He traced the tracks back to the service road, noting the tire marks of a heavy sedan that had peeled away recently. The narrative of the accident, the closed casket funeral, the rushed autopsy report, all the loose ends he had been too grief-stricken to question, suddenly began to weave together into a dark tapestry. Elias drove his truck back to his isolated cabin in the woods, the challenge coin burning a hole in his pocket, his mind operating in a cold, tactical fugue state. He arrived at his home, a place that had been a sanctuary of sorrow, and immediately went to the hidden safe beneath the floorboards of his bedroom. He pulled out a dusty, tough box containing his old gear, weapons, and encrypted communication devices he hadn't touched since his discharge. He wasn't just a father anymore. He was a weapon reactivated by a single piece of evidence. He needed to track the coin, or rather the person who had held it, and that meant diving back into the world he had left behind. a world of surveillance, signals, and shadows. In a secure, safe house hours away, Lily was sent to her room, a sterile space with barred windows and a locked door. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene at the cemetery over and over in her mind. She realized she had left the coin, and terror mixed with hope in her chest. If he found it, he would know. But if Miller found out she had dropped it, the consequences would be severe. Another relocation, a stricter lockdown, perhaps even total isolation. She got up and went to the window, looking out at the dark forest surrounding the safe house, feeling the crushing weight of her reality. She wasn't being protected, she was being hidden, and for the first time, she understood the difference. Elias sat at his kitchen table, illuminated by the glow of a laptop screen, running the serial number of the challenge coin through a back door into the Navy's logistics database, a favor from an old contact still on the inside. The coin didn't ping any recent transactions, which he expected, but he wasn't looking for the coin itself anymore. He was looking for the surveillance footage of the cemetery. He hacked into the municipal grid, accessing the traffic cameras on the road leading to the graveyard. He scanned hours of footage until he saw it. A black sedan entering the service road 20 minutes before he arrived and leaving 10 minutes after. He paused the video, zoomed in on the license plate, and felt a cold rage settle in his gut. The plates were government-issued, masked, the kind used by agencies that didn't officially exist. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The government, the very entity he had served and bled for, was involved in the deception surrounding his daughter's death. It wasn't a drunk driver or a mechanical failure. It was an operation. His hands shook, not from sadness this time, but from the adrenaline of a man who has found a target. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years, a burner line for his old platoon commander. "It's me," Elias said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I need a trace on a vehicle, and I need to know who signed the death certificate for Lily Thorne." The war had come home, and Elias was ready to burn everything down to find the truth. The intel came back faster than Elias expected, confirming his darkest suspicions and shattering the last remnants of his trust in the system he once served. The vehicle was registered to a shell corporation used by the Defense Intelligence Agency for domestic logistics, a front for off-book operations. More damning was the coroner's report. His contact had dug into the archives and found that the signature on Lily's death certificate belonged to a doctor who had died 3 months prior to the date of the document. The lie was sloppy, constructed with the arrogance of people who believed no one would ever look closely. Elias sat in his truck, parked a mile down the road from the safe house coordinates he had triangulated from the sedan's transponder data, checking his weapon, a suppressed Sig Sauer P226 with mechanical precision. Inside the safe house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Miller had discovered the missing coin during a routine inventory of Lily's personal effects. He stormed into her room, his face flushed with anger, tossing her bag onto the floor. "Where is it, Lily?" he demanded, his voice echoing off the bare walls. "The coin. Where did you leave it?" Lily sat on the edge of her bed, her heart pounding, but she looked him in the eye with the defiance she had inherited from her father. "I lost it," she lied, though she knew Miller was too smart to believe it. He grabbed her arm, roughly pulling her up. "Do you have any idea what you've done? If he finds that, he comes for us. And if he comes, I have orders to terminate the asset to prevent a leak." The words hung in the air, chilling Lily to the bone. Terminate the asset. For the first time, the threat wasn't about external enemies. It was about her. Miller realized he had said too much, slipping in his anger, but the damage was done. Lily pulled away, backing into the corner. "You were never protecting me," she whispered, the realization crashing down on her. "You're holding me hostage." Miller composed himself, adjusting his jacket. "Pack your things. We're moving now. The extraction team is 10 minutes out." He locked the door from the outside, leaving Lily trapped with the terrifying knowledge that her time was running out. She frantically looked around the room for a way out, her eyes landing on the ventilation grate near the floor. Elias moved through the woods surrounding the safe house like a ghost, blending into the shadows, his thermal scope scanning the perimeter. He counted 2 guards outside, armed with automatic rifles, patrolling in a pattern that screamed military training. This wasn't a protection detail, it was a containment unit. He disabled the first guard with a chokehold, dragging him into the brush silently, then bypassed the second by slipping under the raised foundation of the house. He could hear muffled shouting from inside, a man's voice yelling orders, and then the sound of furniture being dragged. He placed a small, breaching charge on the back door, timing his entry with the thunder rolling overhead. Lily managed to kick the vent loose, squeezing her small body into the dusty ductwork just as she heard the front door slam open downstairs. She crawled through the tight space, her elbows scraping against the metal, guided by the instinct to flee. She could hear Miller shouting her name, the heavy thud of boots on the stairs. She reached a junction in the vents and looked down through the slats into the kitchen, seeing Miller pacing with a radio in hand. Package is compromised. Initiate scrub protocol. Burn the house once we're clear. The cold brutality of the order spurred her on. She had to get out before they set the fire. The explosion of Elias's breaching charge shattered the night, blowing the back door off its hinges and filling the hallway with smoke and debris. Elias surged into the house, moving with the lethal fluidity of a Tier 1 operator. He engaged a guard in the hallway, 2 shots to the chest, 1 to the head, dropping him instantly. He cleared the rooms methodically, shouting Lily's name, his voice a roar of desperate fury. "Lily! Daddy's here!" "Answer me!" Upstairs, Lily heard him, a voice she hadn't heard in years, loud and real. She screamed back, "Dad, I'm in the vents! Help me!" Her voice guided him, cutting through the chaos of the firefight. Miller, hearing the commotion, abandoned the plan to retrieve Lily and switched to elimination mode. He pulled a grenade from his vest, intending to toss it into the upper hallway to silence both the intruder and the girl, covering his tracks with an explosion. As he pulled the pin, Elias rounded the corner at the top of the stairs. The 2 men locked eyes, Elias recognizing Miller as a former support officer from a Black Ops unit. "Miller!" Elias barked, raising his weapon. Miller sneered. "She was never yours to keep, Elias. She's collateral." He threw the grenade. Elias didn't flinch. He dove forward, kicking the grenade back down the stairwell just as it detonated, the blast shaking the foundation and filling the house with dust. In the confusion of the blast, Elias ripped the ventilation grate off the wall in the hallway. Lily tumbled out, coughing, covered in dust, landing in his arms. The physical contact was electric, a shockwave of emotion that nearly brought Elias to his knees again. He clutched her tight, smelling the shampoo she used, feeling the terrified beat of her heart against his chest. "I've got you," he whispered fiercely, shielding her head with his hand. "I've got you, baby girl. I'm never letting go." But the reunion was cut short by the sound of automatic fire tearing through the walls. The extraction team had arrived, and they were pinning them down. "We have to move," Elias said, shifting instantly back into combat mode. He grabbed Lily's hand, his grip ironclad. "Stay behind me, low. When I say run, you run." They moved towards the window at the end of the hall. The house was catching fire from the grenade blast, the smoke thickening. Elias smashed the window with the stock of his rifle. They were on the 2nd floor, a dangerous drop, but the fire was climbing the stairs. He looked at Lily, seeing the trust in her eyes, absolute and unwavering. "Jump!" he commanded. They leaped together into the dark, crashing into the bushes below, just as the room behind them was engulfed in flames. They scrambled to their feet, bruised but alive, running toward the tree line as bullets chewed up the dirt around their feet. Elias fired back, suppressing the shooters, guiding Lily into the deep woods where he had the advantage. They ran until their lungs burned, putting distance between them and the burning house, the orange glow lighting up the night sky behind them. They reached his truck, hidden in the brush. Elias threw her inside and jumped in the driver's seat, peeling out onto the dirt road. As they sped away into the darkness, the silence returned, but this time it was heavy with shock. Lily looked at her father, bloodied and fierce, and finally broke the silence. "They said you left me," she sobbed. Elias reached over, grabbing her hand. They lied. The adrenaline began to fade as the truck ate up the miles of dark highway, leaving behind the immediate danger but driving them straight into a new, terrifying reality. Elias kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, checking for headlights, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Beside him, Lily was shivering, the shock of the violent extraction setting in. She looked small in the passenger seat, hugging her knees, staring at the man who was both a stranger and the most familiar person in her world. The silence was thick, filled with unasked questions and the weight of lost years. Elias turned the heat up, his own body aching from the fall and the fight, but physical pain was irrelevant. He had his daughter back. "Are you hurt?" Elias asked, his voice rough, afraid that if he spoke too loudly, the illusion would shatter. Lily shook her head slowly. "No, just scared." She looked at his profile, seeing the new scars, the grey in his beard, the hardness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Why did they take me, Dad? Why did they tell me you didn't want me?" The question hung in the air, sharp and accusing. Elias swallowed hard, the guilt of his past choices crashing down on him. He knew the answer involved classified operations, missing money, and men like Miller who used families as insurance policies, but explaining that to a child felt impossible. "Because I saw things I wasn't supposed to see," he admitted, "and they used you to keep me quiet. I thought you were gone, Lily. I swear to God I thought you were gone." They stopped at a cheap motel 3 towns over, paying cash, avoiding cameras. Inside the dingy room, the reality of their situation became unavoidable. They were fugitives. The people chasing them had infinite resources, satellites, police, media. Elias moved the dresser in front of the door and closed the blinds. He sat Lily down on the bed and knelt before her, finally allowing himself to really look at her. She reached out and touched his face, her small fingers tracing the scar on his cheek. "I saw you at the cemetery," she whispered. "I knew you still loved me." Elias broke then, pulling her into a hug that was desperate and fierce, burying his face in her shoulder, letting the tears fall freely. "I never stopped," he choked out. "Not for a second." But the emotional reunion was shadowed by the practical nightmare. Elias's phone, which he had turned off and removed the battery from, was a brick. He had no access to his bank accounts, which would be flagged. He needed supplies, a new vehicle, and a safe place to hide, but his list of allies was short and likely compromised. He explained the situation to Lily, treating her not as a child, but as a partner in survival. "We can't go home. We can't call anyone. We have to disappear." Lily nodded, her fear transforming into resolve. She had spent 3 years hiding. She knew the drill better than most adults. "I know how to dye my hair," she offered, "and I have some money Miller gave me for emergencies." The next morning, the news was already running the story. Rogue Navy SEAL wanted for kidnapping and arson. They showed Elias's picture, labeling him armed and dangerous, unstable, suffering from PTSD. They claimed he had abducted his daughter from a foster home. The narrative was being spun to turn the public against him, to make him a monster. Elias watched the report on the motel TV, his jaw clenched. They were weaponizing his service against him. Lily watched too, seeing how easily the truth could be twisted. "They're lying about everything," she said, anger flushing her cheeks. "We have to tell the truth." Elias shook his head. "The truth doesn't matter right now. Survival does." They ditched the truck in a crowded mall parking lot and stole an older sedan that lacked GPS tracking. Elias drove them west, sticking to back roads, teaching Lily how to read a map, how to spot tails, how to survive. The journey became a dark crash course in tradecraft. The bond between them began to reforge, strengthened by the shared danger. Lily told him about the last 3 years, the different names, the lonely birthdays, the lies Miller told her. Each story added fuel to the fire burning inside Elias. He wasn't just running anymore. He was planning. He realized he couldn't run forever. To be truly free, he had to expose the rot at the core of the agency that stole his life. The psychological toll was heavy. Elias barely slept, keeping watch by the window every night, jumping at every shadow. He saw the trauma in Lily too, the way she flinched at loud noises, the nightmares that woke her up screaming. He felt a profound sense of failure. He had saved her life, but he couldn't save her innocence. One night, while camping in a dense forest to avoid motels, Lily asked, "Are we going to die?" Elias looked at the fire, poking the embers. "No," he said firmly. "I'm going to finish this, but I need you to be brave for a little longer." He decided then that he would stop running. He needed to go on the offensive. Elias remembered a dead drop location, a fail-safe cache of evidence he and his old team had buried years ago in the Nevada desert as insurance against their command. If the drive was still there, it contained the proof of the illegal operations, the money laundering, the very secrets that had made Lily a target. It was a suicide mission to retrieve it, but it was their only leverage. He told Lily the plan. "We're going to get the one thing they're afraid of." It was a shift in dynamic. They were no longer prey. They were hunters. As they crossed the state line into Nevada, the tension in the car was palpable. They were exhausted, dirty, and running on fumes, but they were together. The radio crackled with reports of sightings, closing the net around them. Elias knew Miller would anticipate his move. Miller knew about the old team's protocols. It was a trap, but it was a trap Elias had to spring. He looked at Lily, sleeping uncomfortably against the door, and made a silent vow. He would trade his life for her freedom if it came to that. The chapter ended with them pulling off the road. As a police cruiser passed by, lights flashing, they held their breath, huddled in the dark, the red and blue lights washing over their tense faces. The cruiser continued on. Elias started the engine again. "Close," he muttered. "Too close." He knew the final confrontation was imminent. The desert awaited them, vast and indifferent, the stage for the final act of their desperate escape. The Nevada desert was a sprawling expanse of heat and dust, a landscape that offered no shelter and no mercy. Elias drove the stolen sedan off the main road, navigating rocky trails that threatened to tear the undercarriage apart, heading toward an abandoned mining outpost that served as the landmark for the cache. The sun beat down relentlessly, the air shimmering with heat haze. Lily was awake now, clutching a bottle of warm water, her eyes scanning the horizon. She sensed the shift in her father. He was coiled tight, his focus absolute. "We're almost there," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "When we get there, you stay in the car until I say otherwise. Understood?" Lily nodded, though her hands were trembling. They arrived at the ruins of the mining camp, a ghost town of rusted metal and collapsing wood. Elias parked the car behind a dilapidated shed, hiding it from immediate view. He grabbed a shovel from the trunk and his rifle, moving toward a specific set of coordinates near an old water tower. He dug frantically, the dry earth resisting every strike. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with the dust. After 5 minutes of grueling work, the shovel hit metal. He pulled out a waterproof Pelican case, cracked it open, and verified the contents, a hard drive and a stack of dossiers. This was it. The smoking gun. Before he could celebrate, a bullet kicked up the dirt inches from his boot. The crack of a high-powered rifle echoed through the canyon a split second later. Elias dove behind the water tower's concrete base, shouting, "Lily, get down!" He had been anticipated. High on the ridge overlooking the camp, Miller lowered his sniper rifle, adjusting the scope. "I have him pinned," Miller spoke into his headset. "Move in. Secure the girl. Eliminate the father. Black SUVs poured out from behind the canyon walls, kicking up clouds of dust as they rushed the camp. It was an ambush. Elias was pinned down, suppressing fire chipping away at his cover. He returned fire, his shots precise, taking out the lead driver of the first SUV, causing it to swerve and crash. But he was outgunned. He looked back at the car where Lily was hiding. She was terrified, curled on the floorboard. He had the evidence, but he couldn't use it if they were dead. He made a decision. He pulled the hard drive from the case and held it up, shouting over the gunfire. "Miller, I have the drive. You want it? Come and get it. Let her go, and it's yours." The gunfire ceased. A tense silence fell over the desert. Miller's voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "Bring it out, Elias. No tricks." Elias stood up slowly, hands raised, the hard drive in one hand, his rifle on the ground. He walked into the open. Miller descended from the ridge, flanked by 4 operatives. He looked smug, victorious. "You put up a good fight, old friend," Miller said, walking closer, "but the house always wins." He gestured for his men to grab the drive. Elias looked at the approaching men, then at Miller. "One condition," Elias said, his voice steady. "She walks. You give her a new identity, a real one. You leave her alone. Or I destroy this drive right now." He revealed a detonator in his other hand, rigged to a small explosive charge taped to the back of the drive. Miller paused. The drive contained evidence that would send senators and generals to prison. It was worth more than Elias's life. "Fine," Miller sneered. "She walks. You don't." It was the trade Elias had prepared for. He nodded. "Deal." He tossed the drive to Miller. Miller caught it, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "Secure him," Miller ordered. But as the operatives moved in, a siren wailed in the distance. Not police, but FBI. Elias had uploaded a copy of the encrypted files to a dead man's switch server the night before. The physical drive was a decoy, the detonator real. "I lied," Elias said calmly. He pressed the button. The drive in Miller's hand exploded, not enough to kill everyone, but enough to blow Miller's hand off and create chaos. In the confusion, the FBI tactical team, tipped off by the automatic data dump Elias had triggered, crested the ridge. A chaotic firefight ensued, but this time the cavalry was on Elias's side. He scrambled back to the car, shielding Lily as the federal agents swarmed the corrupt operatives. Miller, bleeding and screaming, was tackled to the ground. The system that had protected him was dismantling itself in real time. Hours later, the dust had settled. Elias sat on the back of an ambulance, a paramedic bandaging a graze on his arm. Lily sat next to him, wrapped in a shock blanket. An FBI assistant director stood before them, looking at the dossiers Elias had handed over. "You caused a hell of a mess, Thorne," the agent said, though there was respect in his tone. "But this is going to bring down a lot of bad people." Elias didn't care about the politics. He looked at Lily. "Is she safe?" The agent nodded. "The threat is neutralized. You're both going to need to go through debriefing, maybe a new start, but you're free." The sun was setting, painting the desert in hues of purple and gold. Elias stood up and walked to the edge of the camp, looking out at the vastness. He was tired. His career was over. His name was tarnished, but he was alive. Lily walked up beside him and slipped her hand into his. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The nightmare was over. They had lost years. They had lost their old lives, but they had found each other in the wreckage. Elias looked down at his daughter, really seeing her, free from the shadow of the grave. He squeezed her hand. "Let's go home," he said softly. Not to a house, that was gone, but to the state of being together. That was the only home that mattered now. They walked toward the awaiting convoy, leaving the ghosts of the past buried in the desert dust, ready to face a difficult but honest future. The soldier had laid down his burden. The father had finally picked up his life.